The secret lives of the women who ran brothels in the gold rush. The town with no God is gold. They didn't build churches first. That was the first thing she noticed when the wagon stopped and her feet touched the dust. No steeples, no bells, no stained glass windows whispering redemption. Just saloons, gambling tables, and men with eyes like wolves that had gone too long without meat. This was a town born from the mouth of the earth, spit out raw, greedy, and half mad. It didn't have a name yet, not a real one. Some called it Black Vulture Gulch, others just called it The Patch. But names didn't matter out here. Gold did, and so did what you were willing to do to survive. She was willing to do anything. She had come west with nothing but a false name and a box of silk corsets she didn't plan to wear. Her mother had told her once, don't trust any place that gets built faster than a grave can fill. But here she was, standing in the middle of a town that had more graves than homes. Wooden crosses stuck into the ground like crooked teeth. No names, no prayers. The men had come for gold, the women for the men. But she had come for power, not the kind you shout about, the quiet kind. The kind that knows where every man's weakness lies and how to make a living off of it. The first night, she stayed in the back of the saloon. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to see. She watched the card games turn into fistfights. She watched a preacher drink until he couldn't remember what forgiveness meant. She watched girls younger than her dance for men old, enough to forget their own daughters' names. The piano never stopped playing, even when the bullets flew, even when the sheriff bled out on the steps. Out here, music was the only thing that kept the madness from swallowing the room. By the third day, she bought the second floor of the saloon. She didn't use money, she used something far more valuable: secrets. One of the miners had a wife back east. Another had killed his partner in a cave-in. She listened, she remembered, and in a town like this, memory was leverage. She named the place the Velvet Bone. No sign out front, no advertisement. Every man who mattered knew where to go when he was tired of pretending to be strong. They said her rooms smelled of lavender and danger. They said the women she brought in didn't cry because she taught them not to. She didn't see herself as a madame. She was an architect, silent queen in a town built by chaos. She didn't sell flesh. She sold forgetfulness. For a coin, a man could forget who he was, who he'd killed, what he'd lost, and for a few more coins, he could believe he was forgiven. But she never believed in forgiveness. Not since the night she buried her real name in a town that never made it to the map. Sometimes, she'd stand at the top of the staircase, watching the smoke rise from cigars and broken dreams. And she'd think, none of them know I own them. Not just their money, their guilt, their habits, their need for something soft in a world built on hard hands. She had no illusions of romance, no fantasies of rescue. She had seen too many women wait for letters that never came. Too many women die with a man's name carved on their skin, not their own. So she carved her name into the wood of the banister, just once, where no one could see but her dot. At night, when the town quieted, which rarely happened, she'd sit in the room farthest from the stairs. She had a mirror in there, not for vanity, but because it was the only thing that told her the truth. The truth was, she was not a saint, but she wasn't a sinner either. She was something else, something the town didn't know how to name, and that was exactly the way she wanted it. The first door she locked, and what she kept behind it. It was the only door in the entire building with a key. The other rooms could be kicked open, their locks flimsy as promises made over whiskey. But not this one. This door was different. It was made from oak, brought in by wagon from 3 towns over, stained dark as dried blood, and framed with iron brackets. It didn't creak. It didn't beg. It simply stood, silent, impatient. Only she had the key. The women asked about it sometimes, but only once. The rule rule was simple. Don't knock, don't ask, don't guess. Behind that door was not a man, not a weapon, it's not a stash of gold. What she kept there was memory. It was a room she built with her own hands, floor by floor, breath by breath, a room that held everything she couldn't say aloud. The wallpaper was red, not velvet, not satin, but cloth. Each panel sewn by her in silence, tiny stitches like secrets she couldn't write down. On the wall was a painting no one had ever seen. A woman sitting alone at a table, hands folded, eyes staring through the canvas like she had just heard bad news that hadn't happened yet. It was her mother. Or maybe it was her dot in that room. She didn't have to choose. There was a chair in the corner no one ever sat in, in a book no one ever opened, pages blank, except for the corner of one on that torn edge. She had once scribbled 3 words, "Don't become her." She didn't remember writing it, but every time she read it, her hands went cold, sometimes at night. After the men had staggered home and the laughter had turned into coughing, she'd enter the room, lock the door, and just sit. No corset, tea, no rouge, no voice like honey dipped in smoke, just her. And for a few stolen minutes, she wasn't a madame, She wasn't a keeper of sins. She wasn't a woman other women feared or followed. She was just the girl who had run away from a train station with 1 coin and a letter that was never answered. There was a small wooden box under the floorboards inside, a yellow ribbon that once held her braid together, a button from a coat that wasn't hers, a dried flower pressed flat, still smelling faintly of violets, and a single bullet, cold, waiting, nameless. She told herself she kept it in case of danger, but the truth was darker. She kept it in case she ever forgot why she built everything, because the moment she forgot, she might start to believe the lies she told the girls, that this was a life, that this was choice, that this was freedom. The first woman she ever hired died 6 weeks later. Her name was May, or at least, that's what she said it was. Names were always foggy out here. She had a laugh like wind chimes in a storm, beautiful, but always at risk of breaking. A customer broke her nose. May laughed, wiped the blood with a lace sleeve, and served the next man like nothing happened. But one morning, she didn't come down for breakfast. The girls thought she overslept, but she knew. Even before unlocking the room, she knew. May had left without leaving. Her body was still warm, but her spirit had packed up in the night. They buried her out behind the stable, the bottle of gin and the necklace she never took off. And that night, she sat in her locked room, holding the yellow ribbon, and whispered May's name 3 times like a prayer she didn't believe in. That was the first night she cried since arriving in Black Gulch. She didn't cry for May. She cried for the part of herself that still believed anyone made it out. After that, she added one more rule to the house: never get buried in this town. If a girl wanted to leave, she paid for the ticket herself. Train, horse, cart, didn't matter. No one stayed longer than the life inside them could survive, and no one was allowed to love the men who came in smelling like violence. The locked room became more than just a refuge. It became an altar, not to God, but to the parts of women the world never asked about, their fears, their rage, their hunger, their softness that hardened under too many cold hands. She kept those parts safe behind the door, because if she let them out, the whole house might burn. And deep down, maybe that's what she wanted, but not yet. That door never creaked, never begged, never gave. And one day, when the sheriff came asking what was behind it, she looked him straight in the eyes and said, "The part of me you don't deserve to meet." He never asked again, and he never came back. Whispers through the floorboards. At first, the floorboards just creaked. That was normal. With breeds in places like these, It groans. It remembers. Every footstep writes a story no one reads. But over time, she noticed something else. There were nights when she wasn't walking, and the floorboards still whispered, not loud, not clear, but low, like the house had lungs, and it exhaled when no one was listening. She'd sit at the edge of her bed, candle flickering, girls asleep in their rooms, tea and murmur beneath the floor. Not rats, not wind, something older, something that had learned how to keep secrets better than she ever could. At first, she blamed her mind. Too many memories. Too little sleep. But then Lily heard it too. Lily was the quietest girl in the house. Barefoot, always. Hands always busy. Eyes always distant. One morning, she came down the stairs pale and trembling. She wouldn't touch. Her tea wouldn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "There's someone under the floor." She didn't laugh. She didn't scold. She just nodded and said, "I know." From that day on, Lily stopped sleeping in her room. She started keeping a blade under her pillow, and no one asked why, because in that house, silence had become its own kind of language. The saloon downstairs never stopped. Boots on wood, coins on tables, screams behind laughter. But upstairs, in the hush of their world, the girls began to walk softer, as if they were being watched from beneath. She began placing salt at the thresholds, not because she believed in ghosts, but because she'd seen what a man can become when he thinks no one is watching. And something was watching. But it wasn't a man. It was the weight of every secret buried in that building. There were stories, of course, the kind passed from girl to girl, in whispers and nods. A woman who never opened her door, but her voice sang at midnight. A baby heard crying in a room that had been empty for years. A man who came for pleasure and left without his shadow. She never confirmed them, but she never denied them either, because denial is a luxury for those who still believe in clean endings. And this place wasn't made for clean endings. One night, a girl named Blanche heard her name through the floor. She was brushing her hair, humming softly. When she froze, she swore. Someone whispered, "Blanche, don't forget." She ran out, barefoot, hairbrush still in hand, and refused to return to her room. She wouldn't say what she heard after that, only that it wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. She left the next morning without a word. And 2 days later, a letter arrived for her from a brother she thought had died in the war. Sometimes, God, the floor whispers the truth before the world. That she began to wonder, not if the house was haunted, but by what dot was it, the women who never made it out? Was it the guilt the men left behind? Or was it something older, something that fed on grief, on forgotten names, on choices no one ever forgave themselves for? She once told the girls, "This house is made of mistakes. It's ours, theirs, and the ones still waiting to be made." And they believed her, because they could feel it in the cold spots, in the mirrors that fogged without breath, in the floorboards that spoke in riddles. There was a trap door in the hallway. No one touched it, not because it was locked, it wasn't, but because everyone agreed, without saying a word, that some doors shouldn't be opened, not because of what's behind them, but because of what they might remember. Once, a drunk tried to lift it. He laughed, saying he wanted to see where all the screams go. He didn't laugh long. He tripped down the stairs later that night, broke his neck. No one claimed his body, and from that day on, even the men walked lighter. She never feared the whispers. She feared forgetting them, because as long as the house remembered, she wasn't alone. As long as the floor whispered, she knew someone was still listening, even if it was just the ghosts of choices that never learned how to die. So every night, before she blew out her candle, she'd press her hand to the floor, not in fear, not in prayer, but in recognition. "I remember you too," she'd whispered back, and for a moment, the house would go still. The rules were written in lipstick and blood. They said that West had no rules. That was a lie told by men who wanted to rewrite them with fists and fire. But in her house, there were rules. Unwritten, yes, but enforced with a sharpness that had nothing to do with knives. Because out here, survival wasn't about who had the biggest gun. It was about who understood the cost of breaking silence and who was willing to bleed to keep it. The first rule was never spoken, it's only felt. You don't cry in front of the men. Tears were currency. And out here, currency was stolen faster than breath. The girls learned quickly how to smile without meaning it, how to laugh without letting it rise too deep, how to wear perfume that made a man forget he smelled like regret. She taught them how to read a room like a map, where the exits were, where the shadows leaned, where a man's voice cracked when his father was mentioned, because pain, when read properly, was a language, and she had become fluent in it long before she ever ran a brothel. The second rule was harsher. Never make a man fall in love with you, not because love was dangerous, but because it was a lie that dressed itself like a savior. She'd seen what happened when a man believed he owned a woman's heart. He stopped paying. He started expecting. And one night, when that expectation wasn't met, he left something behind, a bruise, a scar, or a memory that whispered you should have smiled more. Lipstick was armor in her house. They painted their mouths not to attract, but to warn. A red mouth meant, I'm not afraid of blood. Okay? Perfect shape meant, I've had to make myself beautiful before I felt safe. And when one of them smeared it across her cheek like war paint, the others knew she needed space. They didn't ask questions, not until the girl was ready to speak, if she ever was. And that was the third rule. No one owed their story. In a world where men paid to know your body, she made sure they never got to own your past. The walls of the velvet bone were covered in lace and lies. But if you looked closely beneath the candlelight, behind the framed photographs that never moved, you'd see scratches, tiny marks carved by fingernails, or knives, dates, initials, one sentence carved deep enough to bleed. She said no. No one painted over it. No one dared. The rules weren't written down. But the house remembered them. And when a new girl arrived, she didn't get a pamphlet. She got a bath, a mirror, and a single question. Do you want to disappear, or do you want to be seen? If she answered right, she stayed. If she hesitated, well, hesitation out here was a death sentence whispered in slow motion. The ones who stayed learned fast. Never walk into a room without knowing how to walk out. Keep a blade under your corset, but only use it if you're willing to die over the reason. And, above all, never let a man teach you what you're worth. The rules were sacred, not because they were holy, but because they were built from pain. Every one of them cost someone a night they never got back, a scar they still touched in the dark. There was a reason she never drank, not because she judged it, but because she knew too many girls who forgot. The rules after one glass too many, and the house never forgot. Once, a girl named Cora broke the rule about falling in love. She thought he was different. She thought he'd take her away. He took her all right. Right out of town. Right into the woods. Right into a shallow grave they found 3 months later when the snow melted. She never told the girls what they found on Cora's body, just that the necklace was still around her neck and her lipstick was still perfect. From that day on, the girls sharpened their rules. Some drew them on the insides of their wrists in invisible ink. Some whispered them into pillows like prayers. Some wrote them on scraps of paper and burned them in the fireplace, not to forget, but to feed the house, because the house had listened, it remembered, and in return, it protected most of the time. She walked the halls like a shadow wearing perfume. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words came like thunder with a silk ribbon. One night, she gathered them all around and said, "The men think we sell our bodies, but what they're really buying is permission to believe they still have power. Who'll ever give them more than that?" No one clapped. No one wept. They just nodded, 'cause that was the rule that didn't need to be said aloud. You survive by pretending you're not surviving. And in the West, that was the only rule that ever kept anyone alive. The child she never claimed, and the man she buried twice. She had a child once. That much was certain, though the details were kept in the kind of silence that feels heavier than truth. No one in the house ever saw a child. No toys, no lullabies, no soft shoes by the fire. But one winter evening, as the wind howled like a beast trying to remember its name, she stood by the window, arms folded, jaw set, and said to no one in particular, "He would have been 8 today." The room went still. Even the floorboards knew to keep quiet. The child had no name anyone could recall, no birthday written in ink, no grave marked with flowers, but she remembered in the way her hands sometimes trembled when holding a teacup, in the way she flinched at the sound of a lullaby played too slowly on the piano. She never said what happened, only that he was never supposed to happen, and that he was the only good thing she ever made by mistake. Rumors floated, as they always did. Some said she left the child with a woman in another town, paid her well, and never looked back. Others said the child, or in fever, or in fire. But the truth was quieter than any of them dared imagine. The truth was that he lived, and she watched from far away, behind windows, behind curtains, behind a mask she wore so tightly that even her own reflection didn't recognize her anymore. He was raised by a man who wasn't his father, a preacher with a temper and a garden of dead flowers behind his chapel. She used to send money, never letters, never her name, just folded bills and a pressed violet inside once a year. It was her way of saying, "I remember," even if he shouldn't, 'cause if he knew who she was, he might look for her, and no boy deserves to find his mother in a house like this. But every year, on the same day, she'd lock herself in the red room. She'd light a single candle, place a pair of shoes, too small now, on the floor. Hey, sit, silent, still, whole in her breaking. It was the one day she allowed herself to feel like a mother, even if she had never once held his hand. The man she buried twice was another story. He was the first man she ever trusted, and the last. He arrived in town with clean boots and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much snow and not enough warmth. He didn't speak much, didn't drink, didn't ask for favors. He came to the saloon, not for women, but for the silence between songs. She liked that they spoke without touching for weeks, till one night he asked her if she'd ever wanted to be anything other than what she was. She said yes, then walked away before he could ask what. They became something like lovers, but not quite. She didn't believe in ownership, and he didn't believe in salvation. They met in the red room, not for passion, but for memory. He told her about the war, about the men he left in the snow, about the brother he shot on accident, and the letter he never sent to his mother. She told him nothing, but she let him stay, and that was more than she'd ever given anyone. One morning, he left. No note, no goodbye. She waited a week, then a month, then a season. Finally, she accepted it. He was dead, either to the world or to her. So she buried him metaphorically, took the blanket he used, folded it, placed it beneath the floorboards, beside the bullet and the ribbon. She didn't cry. She just lit a match and watched it go out. A year later, he returned, different, thin eyes, hollow like a house stripped of its furniture. He didn't speak when he saw her, fell to his knees, and whispered, "I tried to forget you." She didn't forgive him, but she let him in. That night, he fell asleep with his head on her lap and never woke up. They said it was the drink or the cold, or the guilt. But she knew better. Some men die before their bodies do. He just waited for a room where his bones could finally stop pretending. They buried him behind the saloon, next to May. No cross. Just a stone with a single word carved into it. Almost. Because that's what they had been. Almost lovers. Almost saved. Almost enough. She buried him twice. Once in silence. Once in soil. And after that, she'd never let anyone call her by her real name again. Because names are what the dead leave behind. And she wasn't done living. Not yet. When the piano played without a player, the piano sat crooked in the corner. Its keys were yellowed like teeth that had bitten too many regrets. The varnish had peeled long ago, and dust lived in its ribs. But still, it played. Not every night. Not even predictably, but when the air grew too heavy, when someone's name was spoken too softly, or someone else's pain screamed behind a locked door, the piano would breathe. Single note, low, deep, as if it were remembering something the rest of the house had tried to forget. No one admitted to hearing it. First, but they all knew. May used to say it started after the preacher came and left a Bible with a missing page. Lily thought it was the baby that never cried. Cora believed it began after Blanche carved her name into the floor and vanished before dawn. But she knew better. It started the night she sang. It was late, the kind of late that doesn't belong to clocks. A man had died on the stairs. Not from violence, just stopped breathing between one step and the next. No one knew his name. He hadn't been carrying gold. Just a photo of a woman holding a dog. No note, no return address. It's just that strange photograph and the smell of pine sap in his coat. The sheriff didn't come. No one asked for him. Instead, she told the girls to light candles, to wash the blood from the steps, to set the piano stool upright again. And then she sang. Her voice wasn't sweet. It wasn't beautiful. It was cracked, raw, a voice made of broken promises stitched back together. She didn't sing for the man. She sang for everything the house had swallowed and never spat out. Pain, love, women, names, all the things the town had no use for. She sang them back into the walls, in the piano. It answered a single note, then another, not loud. It's just enough to remind her she wasn't alone after that. The piano played when it wanted. Sometimes it was a soft chord, drifting through the hallway like a forgotten letter. Other times it was one single key struck over and over like a heartbeat in panic. Once, it played for nearly an hour without pause. No one touched it. The room had been empty, the door locked, but the melody danced like someone had taken off their shoes and decided to remember how to feel. The girls stopped using that room, even though the acoustics were better. Even though the light hit the mirror just right in the morning. They said it gave them dreams, not nightmares. Not exactly dreams, where voices whispered things they hadn't told anyone. Dreams where the walls bled, names they hadn't spoken aloud in years. Dreams where the piano keys turned into teeth and asked them what they were hungry for. She never stopped using the room. She said if the house was willing to speak, she would listen, even if it lied. One night, a man demanded she play for him. He was loud, drunk, wearing a badge that no longer matched the town's law. He slammed coins on the piano, slurred that he wanted to hear something beautiful. She looked at him, then at the piano, and said softly, "Beauty doesn't play for men like you." He laughed, reached for her wrist. That was his mistake. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the piano and whispered, "Play a T." It did, a violent, jarring chord. Like thunder cracking bone, the man stumbled, grabbed at the wall, then ran shoes, slipping, face pale. He never came back. And the next morning, the piano had a crack across its lid that hadn't been there before. Some said the piano was cursed, but she called it remembrance, because in a place where so much was forgotten, where girls changed names like dresses and men came to erase themselves, something had to remember, and if it took an instrument long abandoned and tired of being silent, so be it. Sometimes at night she'd sit beside it, fingers hovering over keys she hadn't touched in years, not playing, listening, waiting for the moment when the room grew still enough for the house to speak through music. She knew the notes weren't random. They were memories, some hers, some not, some that hadn't happened yet. And every time the piano sang alone, wondered if it was mourning something or calling something back from the dark. The necklace made of teeth. She wore it only once. The necklace, it wasn't made of pearls, not gold, not jewels stolen from the necks of men who died mid-confession. No, it was made of teeth, small, human, milk white, each strung carefully on a thread of sinew, tied at the back with a knot no one dared untie. She didn't speak of where it came from, but the night she wore it, no one slept. Lily was the first to see it. She had gone to bring tea, a nightly ritual for the madame no one called by name. But when the door opened, the candlelight caught something. Pale. At first, she thought it was bone, but it swayed slightly, like something too fragile to belong to death. And then she saw it clearly. Teeth, children's teeth, strung like trophies, or warnings, or memories. Lily didn't ask. She placed the tea down and backed out slowly. She didn't speak of it until years later. Long after the house was ash and the town was dust. That night, the house felt colder. The piano didn't play. The floorboards didn't creak. Even the usual groans of drunken men in the saloon below seemed muffled, like the walls were holding their breath. The girls stayed in their rooms, doors locked, candles burned down low. No one wanted to admit they were afraid, but they were, because the necklace wasn't a decoration. It was a statement. She remembered, and whatever she remembered that night wasn't for forgetting. Some said the teeth were hers, baby teeth saved from a past life she'd never spoken of. Others said they belonged to girls who never made it through their first winter, and one whispered theory, the one no one dared speak aloud near the stairs, said the necklace was a gift from a man who collected children the way miners collected gold, and that when she found out what he did, she took back what he had stolen. Not the lives, not the breath, but the proof. One tooth for every scream he silenced, and she wore it once, just to remind herself that monsters could bleed. She never confirmed it. She never denied it. But the day after she wore it, a man was found dead behind the saloon. No wounds, no blood, just eyes wide open and a scream caught between his teeth, as if something had followed him out of her memory and refused to let go. He wasn't from town. No one claimed him, but she placed a tooth, just one, on his chest before they buried him. And that night, the piano played again, soft, slow, a lullaby for the wicked. The necklace disappeared after that. No one saw it again. Not on her. It's not in her room. Not in the little box where she kept other tokens of her past. But the air around her changed, sharper, like the scent of metal before lightning strikes, like the feeling of being watched by something that knows your name and your secrets. She once told a girl in passing, people think memories live in the brain, but they don't. They live in the bones, in the teeth, in the things we leave behind without meaning to. And the girl never smiled with her mouth open again, because now she understood. Every tooth that falls remembers something you tried to forget. Years later, a woman came into town asking about a madam with dark eyes and quiet rage. She carried a map, a letter, and a necklace made of teeth. She said it was hers now, that the woman had given it to her the night before she vanished. No one believed her. No one dared call her a liar either. because the teeth, they hummed. Not loud, not music, just a low sound, like breath behind a door you didn't know was open. She left town the next morning, no goodbyes, but the piano didn't play for a week. After that, the floorboards refused to speak, as if the house itself was mourning something, or someone, something sacred, something broken, something strung together with pain, thread, and teeth. What was buried beneath the bed? The bed was not just a bed, it was a stage, a battleground, a coffin with better linens. It held bodies, yes, of men, of women, of moments that shouldn't have happened, but did anyway. But it also held something else, something older than memory, something that never left, even after the rooms were cleaned and the candles replaced, because under that bed, she buried something, and no one ever asked what. The bed itself was heavy, for posts carved by hand, not by her, but by a man who claimed he once worked on a ship that sank before it ever touched water. Cut. The carvings told stories, vines, wolves, moons in different phases. The mattress was newer, stuffed with wool and silence. The sheets changed weekly, but the frame never moved. No one could move it, not because it was too heavy, though it was, but because something inside them said, "Don't." She was the only one who ever looked neath it, and only once. She had buried it herself, late one night, when the house was still, and the piano keys were silent for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a box, it wasn't a body, it was something smaller, more fragile. A letter folded 4 times until the edges tore, wrapped in cloth once white, now the color of regret. Inside the letter, a single sentence, written in ink so faded it might have been dried tears. You said you wouldn't become this. No name, no signature, just that. She read it once. Then she buried it right beneath the center beam of the bed, pressed into the floorboards with her bare hands, nails splintering against the wood. She didn't cry, not then. She just lay down on the bed, fully clothed, shoes still on, and for the first time in years, she let herself sleep without dreaming. The bed grew colder after that. Men complained, said the room was beautiful, but the air was like winter behind their ribs. One said he heard whispering beneath the floor. Not voices, it's just the sound of someone writing pen on paper. Endlessly, another woke in a sweat and ran down the stairs. Claiming hands had reached for his ankles from the shadows. She never denied it. She simply replaced the candles with thicker ones, burned lavender in the corners. Told the girls some truths you have to sleep on before you can survive them. There was one girl, Josie, who asked her directly. She was young, sharp, not yet broken by the softness she had to fake. Josie had cleaned the room, dusted under the frame as best she could without looking too close, and then she asked, "What's really under there?" She answered without turning her head, "Me." Josie laughed at first, then she stopped, because the way the madame said it, it wasn't metaphor, it was memory. After that, no one cleaned that room without gloves, not because of blood, but because of weight. Emotional weight leaves fingerprints, and those boards carried enough to press into your palms long after you walked away. Some nights, the bed creaked when no one was on it, as if someone had laid down gently, or risen in the dark without waking. The girl said it was the ghost of a promise, or maybe the memory of a girl who once believed in love. She knew better. It was the truth beneath the mattress, stirring, turning, waiting for her to remember. She considered digging it up once, not because she wanted to, because she feared forgetting why she buried it at all. But when she tried, the floor refused to open. The wood held firm. The nails seemed deeper, and her hands shook in a way they hadn't since the day she first arrived in that town with a fake name and a real scar. So she left it. Some truths are meant to be buried, not to hide them, but to stop them from growing into something worse. And from that night on, no one ever used that bed again. Not for pleasure, not for sleep, not for pretending. It became a shrine to a sentence, to a girl, to a version of herself she wasn't ready to forgive, and maybe never would be. The fire that didn't burn everything. The fire began in silence. No scream, no crash, no warning, just a flicker. A breath of heat, too soft to fear, until it WASN, single quotes, it started in the back room. The one no one used anymore. The one that still smelled faintly of perfume and prayers that had nowhere to go. By the time the smoke reached the staircase, the house had already made its decision. Not everything would burn, only what needed to. They ran, of course. The girls, barefoot, clutching dresses and ribbons and pieces of each other. They ran into the cold dawn with ash in their throats and names in their mouths. They hadn't spoken in years. Some wept, some didn't, some looked back. Most didn't, but she didn't run. She stood in the hallway, barefoot like them, but still as stone, watching the smoke rise like a sermon she never believed in. And then she walked back inside. The fire moved strangely. It devoured the wallpaper in seconds, left the staircase untouched. It licked the piano, left it blackened but intact, swallowed the paintings, spared the frame where her mother's eyes once stared through time. The red room went first. The lock melted. The cloth walls curled like dry leaves. And the chair in the corner, the one no one ever sat in, let out a sound like a final breath. She watched it go and did not cry. The bed, the one with truth buried beneath it, did not burn. The fire danced around it, touched the posts, then recoiled. Ash gathered in the corners. But the center stayed cold, untouched, as if the fire, too, had secrets it was not willing to disturb. By the time the men arrived, the sheriff, the preacher, the drunk, with nothing left to save, it was too late. The roof had collapsed. The chandelier lay shattered in the street like broken stars, but no bodies, no bones, no screams still hanging in the rafters, just smoke, and the madame, standing in the middle of it, covered in soot, in silence. She looked at them and said, "It only took what didn't belong." And then she walked past them, barefoot, as if the ground no longer burned beneath her. They never rebuilt the house. The town wanted to. Some said it was cursed ground. Others said it was sacred. No one could agree, but when the snow came that winter, it fell gently over the ruins, like a blanket over a child's bed, or a silence no longer angry. The girls scattered. Some returned home. Some vanished into cities where no one asked why their eyes flinched at candlelight. Some married, some did not, but every one of them remembered, not just the house, not just a woman, but the feeling that for a while they were seen, not saved, not healed, but seen, and sometimes that was enough. Years later, travelers would stop in the town and ask about the fire. Locals would shrug, point to the ashes, say it was lightning or a stove or vengeance, but none of them could explain why, in the middle of that blackened lot, a single rose bush still bloomed. Every spring, bright, red, alive in soil that should have killed everything. They never touched it. They never spoke near it, because some things survive fire for a reason. And as for her, down, with eyes like locked rooms and a voice that could command silence itself. No one saw her leave, but they say a woman with soot on her feet walked into a chapel 2 towns over, sat in the back, didn't speak, didn't sing, just listened, and when the music stopped, she whispered, "Some songs don't need saving, just a place to burn and begin again." The name, they whispered, even after she was gone. She had many names, some given, some stolen, some whispered in the dark by men who didn't deserve to know her. but none of them were hers. Not really, because her true name was never written down, never carved into stone, never called across a room with innocence. It lived behind her eyes, in the pause before she spoke, in the silence she carried like a crown of thorns wrapped in velvet. And when she was gone, the town never said it out loud, but they whispered it like a prayer, or a warning, or both. There were stories, of course, legends, tales passed between broken fence posts and empty whiskey glasses. Some said she died in the fire. Others said she became the fire, that her soul lives in the heat that rises from cracked earth at noon, that when the wind blows just right, you can hear her heels on old floorboards long since turned to ash. One prospector claimed she saved him once, pulled him from a river after he'd tried to drown his shame. He said her hands were warm and her eyes were already mourning him. He lived another 20 years and never took another drink. When asked who she was, he simply said, the woman who remembered more than she should have. In a town where memory rots like teeth left too long in the cold, she was the exception, the ember that refused to die, the wound that refused to scar over. They say if you walk where the brothel once stood, if you stand very still, right where the bed didn't burn, you'll feel it. Not a ghost, not a chill, but a presence, like someone watching, waiting, listening to the silence to make sure you hear your own heartbeat. A girl once returned, older now, wiser, a mother herself, with a child too curious and a husband too gone. She stood at the edge of the ruins, holding a flower, red, wild, growing from her own garden, the one she swore would only know honesty. She knelt, placed the flower at the foot of nothing, and whispered, "You were the first woman I saw bleed and still stand." The wind rose gently, and somewhere far off, a piano played a single, perfect note. No one wrote her story down. No book, no sermon, but her rules lived on in the way women locked their doors twice, in the way they taught their daughters the difference between touch and tenderness, in the way some men paused before raising their voices, as if remembering a place where silence had power and beauty, or knives beneath her dress. They say names fade, but hers didn't. Not because people remembered it, but because they remembered how it felt to be in her presence, like standing near something ancient. Not old, ancient, like looking into a fire that sees you back in the last days of her life, if she ever truly died. Some say she worked in a library, quiet, invisible, guiding fingers to pages that held answers no one dared speak aloud. And when a girl too sad for her age came looking for a book on how to disappear, the woman behind the desk handed her a mirror and said, "Don't erase yourself for a world that never learned your shape." The girl cried, took the mirror, and stayed alive. She never saw the woman again. But every year, on the same day, she lights a candle, not for the woman's death, but for her fire. Because some women aren't meant to be remembered by name. They're remembered by the way. Silence changes when they leave a room, by the rules they carved into the bones of other women, by the truths they buried beneath beds, beneath smiles, beneath entire lives. And those women, the ones who carry the names of all the girls they used to be, they never really vanish. They become myth, smoke, the hum of piano keys. Long after the music stops, they become the whisper behind the curtain, the warmth in the ashes. They become the story no one dares to tell out loud, but everyone feels when they close their eyes and remember what it means to survive. The end.